that the Russians will only respect strength and they will only comply with any ceasefire if there is a force that will compel them. Ukraine has stopped Russia without the West even committing to helping them win. So imagine if we had made the decision. It is unbelievable to me that the American side would take what appears to be the Russian side in this. The Russians just have to believe that the French or the British would in fact use a nuclear weapon. Europe still does not have the political will to do what needs to be done.
First of all, I would like to start with maybe a simple question, but it's not obvious. Are closer to end the war in Ukraine, actually?
You're right. It's not such an obvious, simple answer. I mean, the American president his team has said we are, but I think if you ask or if you look at the battlefield, it doesn't seem or feel like it's any closer. The Russians clearly do not have any interest in a real sustained peace. Certainly nothing where Ukraine remains a viable sovereign state. So I'm very skeptical of comments that would indicate that somehow we are getting close. It seems unlikely, frankly, at this point, given who and what Russia is.
You stated in yesterday interview with Bloomberg that Vladimir Putin has zero interest in a genuine lasting agreement, and his goal remains to destruction of Ukraine. Is it correct still?
I would say exactly the same thing. They show no respect for the process. The hours after they agreed to a ceasefire against energy infrastructure, they attacked Ukrainian infrastructure. The Ukrainians are not confused or fooled. They understand exactly who and what Russia is. So no, I think that the Russians will only respect strength and they will only comply with any ceasefire if there is a force that will compel them to live up to that agreement. So I have zero optimism that they would just on their own because they really want peace. I don't believe that at all.
You mentioned that the Ukrainians know who the Russians are, but does the new U.S. administration know it as well? Because
I think there's a combination. I think there's a combination of. Let me say it differently. I'm surprised at how willingly the president's envoy, Mr. Witkoff, uses and repeats Russian talking points. And you never, ever hear any condemnation of anything about Russia. All of the demands are for Ukraine to give up something. So between Mr. Witkoff, Secretary Rubio, who I know knows better from all his previous years, for them to just completely accept the Russian perspective on all this, and that somehow this war is justified by Russia, that Ukraine is to blame. These are all Kremlin talking points, and it just is unbelievable to me that the American side would take what appears to be the Russian side in this.
Mr. Witkoff stated that he's optimistic about getting to a fully ceasefire in a couple of weeks. Is it possible, in your opinion?
Yeah, it's possible if Russia, which is responsible for starting the war, if they say, we stop, and then they pull out. Now, of course, that's possible if the Russians do it, but the Russians are not going to do that. And I don't think any serious people believe that they will.
And is there a possibility to reach out a ceasefire or a peace agreement without any disintegration of Ukrainian territory? Or you mean other?
Yes, it is possible if we had supported Ukraine's defense in a more comprehensive way. This war should have ended last year with Ukraine defeating Russia, pushing them back to the 1991 borders. That should have happened if the United States and all of our allies had made the commitment to helping Ukraine actually win this war. I mean, Ukraine has stopped Russia without the West even committing to helping them win. So imagine if we had made the decision we want Ukraine to win because it's in our interest, not charity for Ukraine, but it's in our interest. Imagine if we had done
Yes.
that and used all of our economic tools to put pressure on Russia so that they cannot keep exporting oil and gas to China and India, for example, or if we had given them the weapons they needed without restriction. All of these things would have made a huge difference. So, yes, it is possible that Ukraine could win, but we would have to do our part. We would have to make that. Otherwise, I think that we're in a situation where the Ukrainians know they cannot just give up to Russia. And for Vladimir Putin, he does not care how many hundreds of thousands of his own soldiers are killed. I think for as long as he lives, he will continue to want to see the destruction of Ukraine as a state.
But do you think that we finally reached the point that Europe actually have understood that its position, that it need to force its own strength in terms of the war in Ukraine, or is it's gonna be still words instead of doing something actually?
I see and hear and feel a genuine change across Europe in terms of number one, recognizing that Russia is a threat. That's the first step, is that people have to realize and be honest, yes, Russia is a threat. That's if you don't get that, then you're never going to get politicians to raise spending. The second thing is that you're starting to see countries, national leaders talk more seriously about taking direct action. The French president obviously has been a leader. The Finnish president has been a leader. Poland has always been a leader here. But now in Germany, it looks like they are just about to complete changing the law that would allow significant increase in defense spending. So these are indicators that nations are taking seriously the threat, the challenge, and the requirement to do something, both because of Russia and also I think they anticipate or they sense that the United States is becoming perhaps somewhat disengaged.
The eastern countries, Central Eastern countries of Europe have understood that Russia is a threat, but uh, the change has happened in the West. So I mean, France, Germany, and all of Western countries, which finally realized that it's not a joke that the Eastern countries have been right, actually. So
That's
you
correct.
mentioned that that's correct,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
stra- latest announcement made by the European Union to strengthen the defense industry is a good step to to do it. Actually,
Yeah, these are, of course, important steps that to unleash the potential of Europe's strong economies. The combined economies of Europe, it dwarfs Russia.
yeah.
I mean, huge advantage if they can work together and do what's necessary to unleash the potential of that industry. That means changing laws that would allow country or companies to build and produce things before they receive a direct order from the government, or to reprioritize ammunition, for example. A lot of the ammunition that is produced in Europe today goes to customers in Africa and the Middle East. Reprioritize
It
that to
is.
Ukraine. Even in Germany, there's a debate now, finally, about allowing universities to contribute to research and development for
Yes.
defense purposes. These are all things that could happen quickly, uh, sooner than it will take to get some other things done.
And do you think that it's a step to gain a place at the table in terms of negotiations for peace in Ukraine for Europe, which
Well,
was all cut out by
yeah.
President Trump?
So it's obvious that the administration has no respect for Europe, or at least is not interested in having Europe get in there and try to influence the these talks. But
Hmm.
So Europe has to, like your foreign minister, Mr. Sikorsky said,
Yeah.
you have to build your own table, or you earn your way to the table by demonstrating that you're not going to just accept whatever the Russians and the Americans come up with. Europe is not bound by this. The Ukrainians are not bound by this. And so, while I certainly hope that that the U.S. administration is successful in finding a way to a real peace that is sustainable and that can be accepted by the Ukrainians, um, I think it will be very difficult to do without Europe also being a part of it. And so I think here this is where European countries have to be thinking, if Ukraine fails or if Russia gets the deal it wants, you're going to see millions of Ukrainian refugees coming into Poland and Germany and Romania and other countries. And you're going to see continued disruption of food and energy shipments coming from the region. And I think, you're going to see Russia making an assessment that Europe still does not have the political will to do what needs to be done. And so to me, that raises the risk of Russian aggression.
One of the steps which the Baltic countries and Poland have made recently is to resign from the convention about landmines. You wrote it about an article in SIPA. Is it a good step actually, and should other European countries follow the
Yeah,
lead?
yes, it's a necessary step. Look, we're talking about protecting your population from Russia, and we've seen what Russia does in Ukraine. They have no mercy on civilians. They destroy civilian infrastructure, and the Russian way of war is the way it has been for centuries. That they pound with artillery and rockets, and then they push uh, these massive human wave attacks. Yeah, the only way you stop that, of course, is with landmines, cluster munitions. That's why those things were developed. We developed cluster munitions back in the Cold War days because we anticipated having to fight huge Soviet formations. So I don't know how a government cannot support something like this when we're talking about protecting their population, protecting their soldiers against a larger Russian attack.
So it's a step that NATO should continue in upcoming talks and the summit in Hague.
Well, these are national decisions. That's not a NATO decision, but I think the alliance. When I think about how the alliance would defend its territory, it's hard to imagine doing that without landmines and cluster munitions.
You stated in an article that it could save thousands of Ukrainian lives to use the cluster ammunition earlier. So it's a good way to protect your own civilians and
Again, this is why these were developed, was to be able to destroy a larger enemy force. Of course, there is always the potential for unexploded rounds to be on the ground. That makes life
troops.
difficult for farmers, for civilians out in the area. So none of this is without risk, but it is far less. It is far more dangerous when you have Russian troops, in your town.
Of course, as it came to NATO, recent updates by NBC News were that U.S. command is going to shift from Europe actually, and leave the post from secure. You also commented that it's a financial issue, not a strategical one.
Well, what I said was, I don't, and of course, this is only a proposal that I
Yeah,
heard about on Monday.
yeah.
Um, and I asked the journalist who told me about it. I said, well, what is the strategic analysis that the administration has done that led to the conclusion that giving up secure position would advance America's strategic interests. Maybe it's there. I've not seen it or heard it. So this combined with other things like maybe combining U.S. European Command and Africa
Hmm?
Command into one headquarters,
Yep.
reducing the size of U.S. forces in Europe. I don't know how this advances America's strategic interests. Um, the administration has only been in place for 2 months, um, almost 2 months, and many positions in the Pentagon are still not filled. How have they done the very important comprehensive analysis that would tell them we will be better, we will be more secure if we do this? I don't see that yet. So that's why I said it feels more like a cost cutting or symbolic move than a something that's for our strategic interests.
And you stated in an article that it could lead to losing bases in Eastern Central Europe, like, for example, Poland. So we got a new base in Poland, the Redzikowo, Aegis ashore. Is it possible that it could be part of it, in your opinion, of course?
Of course, I don't know. With this administration, I don't know. And look, it's appropriate. It's appropriate for the administration to do what we call a global force posture review. This is normal. Every
Yep.
administration does this to look to balance priorities with resources. Do you have everything in the right place? So it is their duty to do that. What I don't know is what direction they plan to go. What is the strategy behind all this, other than we want to put more in Pacific and we want Europe to do more. Other than that,
Uh,
I don't hear anything.
you said on an interview with the Sonntagsblick, a Swiss newspaper, that the question is when, not if, US troops would be reduced by the new US administration in Europe. So, should we be prepared? Is it the
Yeah.
first step, maybe?
Um, I think it won't come at one time, but I would imagine that the
Hmm?
administration will be looking for ways to reduce U.S. force posture in Europe
Yes.
to free up financial resources for other purposes. So there's a financial aspect to this, but also to make it clear that they're serious about Europe taking on more responsibility for its own defense. Now, as you probably know, Tomasz, that a
Yeah.
lot of the U.S. that's in Europe is rotational. They're units that come
Of
for
course.
6 months, 9 months. Um, that's paid for by a budget above the normal budget. So this is the easiest, quickest money to cut. Um, and then there's the troops that live in Europe that are assigned in Germany and Italy or Poznan or Turkey, Italy, yeah, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines. That's a different part, but I think that's probably will be cut too. I don't know this. I can't
Hmm?
confirm all this,
Yeah, of
but as
course.
I think about it, um, I think that we're going to see. Well, the traditionally in the U.S., whenever they need to cut the budget for whatever reason, or they want to move money somewhere, the Army is always the first thing that gets cut because you can save the most money by cutting people, right?
Yeah.
And so if you cut a lot of the force structure, the size of the Army, that frees up a lot of money quickly, or quicker than doing other things. And so if you're going to cut a huge part of the Army, which I know that's what's being discussed, obviously the Army that's in Europe would not be exempt from that.
So, is Europe already, I would say, capable of defending itself without US troops present in Europe?
Well, you know, I would say yes and no. But yes, you have a huge economic advantage over Russia. You have
Of course.
countries like Poland and Finland and Romania and Italy, France that have significant military capabilities. Germany is finally starting to address its shortfalls. UK has high quality, just not a lot. But if you add together all of these capabilities, it's significant, economic as well as air, land, and naval forces. Um, what you don't have a lot of are air and missile defense. That's a shortfall. Although the United States does not provide a lot of air and missile defense, um, the
It's
intelligence net,
crucial.
the intelligence networks that we all share with each other, you know, that would have to be adjusted if the U.S. began to withdraw some of its. But again, it's not just American satellites that are the security for Europe. It's all the different things that all the nations contribute. So yes, much of that could be eventually replaced. But I mean, countries would have to share intelligence better if it's not going back and forth to the U.S. Um, and then the nuclear deterrent, of course. Uh, if the United States, for whatever reason, decided that it was no longer going to be a participant in the nuclear deterrence part of NATO, for example. And I don't hear that, but just you're asking what can Europe do without the U.S. For nuclear deterrence, you don't have to have the exact same number as the Russians. The Russians just have to believe that the French or the British would in fact use a nuclear weapon. That's deterrence is about capability, but it's also about credibility.
Not about actual numbers.
Not necessarily.
The debate about nuclear deterrence is still going on in Poland, but without any outcome yet. But there is a proposal made by French President Macron on the table, so France could step in as a nuclear deterrence force
Well,
in
that
Europe.
would be for the French. That would be for the French to say. They have always maintained
Yeah,
sovereignty over. They're not part of the NATO nuclear planning group, so
yeah.
um, that does give them some flexibility to do more if they should choose to do so.
And what about any security guarantees for Ukraine? Should it be also as joining NATO, not talking about nuclear deterrence or a European Union? You said that first of all they should join European Union. What about it in
Yeah, of course.
terms of the ongoing negotiations?
Well, of course, Ukraine should be part of the EU,
Mhm.
but that will not be a security guarantee, not the way that NATO would. So the best security guarantee for Ukraine, other than being in NATO, is that it is able to continue to grow and modernize its own forces, and that its defense industry grows, so that it can continue to produce what it needs and increase that so that it
Mhm.
becomes this place that Russia does not want to attack. And actually, I think that could come sooner rather than later. But they need the confidence that Europe is with them and that Europe will help provide industrial capacity.
And is it upcoming? It is actually. And about mm, the upcoming negotiations in Saudi Arabia, do you expect that they will provide somehow a breakthrough, or we just still need to wait and
Yeah,
accept for the
I,
best?
I think we have to wait. I don't see anything different happening unless the Russians all of a sudden change their. Which obviously I hope I'm wrong, but I just don't see it yet.
We heard about the Russian propositions, so to cut off Ukraine from Western supplies. Uh, would it be an invitation for Putin to attack stronger or whatever?
I
How
don't
do
think
you
they can.
interpret it?
They can't. They can't. They're doing everything they can now. So
Hmm.
uh, they don't need an invitation. They are already doing
Yeah,
everything they can. So I don't have. any reason for optimism that discussions in Jeddah will be produce anything more significant than what we're already seeing, unless there's a significant attitude change by the Russians or by the administration.
Okay, and maybe the last question, actually, maybe not so serious anymore, but one of the topics discussed by President Trump and President Putin was about a hockey game. Uh, on one hand, we have like we're hearing about a third war, which is right behind the corner, and on the other hand, they just discussing a hockey game. Is it like serious anymore?
I can't comment on that. I don't know I heard about that, but I don't know the
Yeah.
context or anything, so I couldn't make any useful commentary on that.
All right.
In the Cold War days,
Mm-hmm.
we played hockey against the Soviet Union, and there were ways to maintain some sort of semblance of a relationship between the countries even during the Cold War. But we're in something different. This is not the same, and Russia should not be treated like some normal country. The president of the
Yeah.
Russian Federation has been convicted by the International Criminal Court. I don't know. To me, it seems entirely inappropriate for the American president to talk about Putin as if he is some normal great leader.
And the improving of relations between Russia and United States. Should Europe be worried about it? Because
Well, look, Europe is up here with the United States if they can act together. But if Europe
if they
continues,
can.
yeah, well, okay, that's up to Europe then.